In recent years, in not only pop culture but also in the book industry, the trope of the vampire or just vampire genres in general have not been as popular as they were in the 2000s and early 2010s. And I remember coming across a video by a booktuber called Alexa Dunn, and she mentioned how there are certain genres in the book industry that are dead, and vampires are one of them. And I was curious as to why. Why are they dead? And will they ever have a revival later on in the future? If you are aware, or if you were alive, or if you remember the early 2000s, or even the 90s, the vampire genre was very popular. And we can credit the popularity of that vampire genre due to Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. Because of Stephenie Meyer's Twilight, in turn, TV shows like True Blood, The Vampire Diaries, and even films like Underworld, although that came a little bit before Twilight, were very popular and dominated pop culture. Over the years, in the 2010s, that has kind of fizzled out. And I came to the conclusion, based on certain factors in society, that the vampire trope or the concept of vampires have lost their mystique in society. And I'm going to explain why that is. So the concept of the vampire originated in Eastern Europe. I think was it Bulgaria or either in one of the Slavic countries. So the idea of the vampire was conceptualized to represent the fears that society had. For example, whether it came to religion, race, or any deviancy from the norm in society. And because before the 21st century, even a little bit early before 21st century, society was mainly superstitious. So they had to rely on certain concepts from religion or spirituality to understand the fears that they had or the unusual things that they were seeing amongst society, and they needed to find a way to explain it. And vampires was one way to explain any deviancy that they saw. So for example, if people had mental health, they would explain it away by they were possessed by demons. Or if women suffered from a miscarriage, they would explain it away that there is a female demon causing the miscarriages because that female demon is jealous of their fertility because that female demon is infertile. In an article by Stephen Kimberly, A Psychological Analysis of the Vampire Myth, the vampire myth has always been the subject of fear, a characterization of a primal fear of emotions within human unconsciousness. So with texts like Camilla, a vampire text about a female vampire, that surrounded society back then, their fears on female sexualities, especially around female sexuality when it pertains to being lesbian. With these fears that society had, whether sexuality or race or religion, the main idea is that the vampire trope is there to represent the other, those who are seen as outside of society, those who are seen as unusual to the status quo of society. We could even see this idea in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, where Nellie Dean, and I can't quote it word for word, but when describing Heathcliff, she describes him as a ghoul or a vampire, as his appearance is very unusual. Nobody knows his background. His race is particularly ambiguous, as he's always referred to as a gypsy. And when he does leave the place in Wuthering Heights, I can't remember the name for the life of me, he comes back and all of a sudden he's wealthy and is very mysterious as to how he's gathered that wealth. But for them to understand Heathcliff, I guess, or to conceptualize or embody their fear in Heathcliff, they have to describe him that way as unusual. However, what I'm proposing with the loss of the mystique of the vampire is, as a society, do we have anything to fear to use the trope of the vampire to attach to it? As we've approached into the 21st century, we've had LGBTQ rights, for example, legalizing gay marriages. We've come through 2020 after the George Floyd riot and people gaining more awareness of racism, especially in America. So, and also, religion has been on the decline. More and more societies, at least in the Western world, have become a lot more secular. And as people turn away from God, and as these social issues, although not perfect, have made an advancement compared to the past, is there a purpose of the vampire and what they represent and how we're able to channel our fears? And because of that, I think, because society has moved away, mostly religion, we have seen in the late 90s and the 2000s the romanticization of vampires. So again, for example, we have like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We have the True Blood series, the book series by Charmaine Harris. We have the Vampire Diaries, for example. I argue with that romanticization, they've kind of peeled away the fear that we had for vampires. We know everything about them, that our fear for them or our intrigue for them has been lost because of this romanticization. In a way, what has interested us in vampires is their inhumanity, meaning that they are beautiful, they're ethereal in a way, but there's that slight danger and they get to live forever, that eternal life that I think also contradicts to the idea of religion as well, that in religion, certain religions, you die, you go to heaven, but vampires seem to defy that. So there's that curiosity that we have when it comes to the vampires and their qualities. But not only that, they've been humanized in a way that we can relate to them. For example, the idea of vampires going to schools, vampires dating. They're able to walk into the sun whether they glitter or whether they wear daylight rings. And because every aspect of the trope, of the vampire trope, has been played with love triangles, with different ways of describing their mythology, I don't think there's any way we can subvert or flip the trope to make it interesting. I feel like we've peeled back the veil too much, that there's nothing else we can connect, or there's nothing else mysterious about vampires. So much to the point that whenever we try to read a new book about vampires, or if there is an attempt of a TV show, we're kind of bored. And I mostly think about Ian Somerhalder's vampire show on Netflix and how that was cancelled after the first season. Granted, I don't think it helped that he went on to another vampire show right after the Vampire Diaries, but also people are bored of vampires. There's nothing new to use. Whether it is to use the vampires as our fear for disease, or to use the vampires as our fear of the other, which in today's climate would be problematic if that was the case. I don't think the vampire is of any use for us today. And I don't think we'll see a resurgence of the vampire in a while. I will have to put a slight pause in this thought I have, because recently I've watched the trailer for Nosferatu, and based on the cinematography, I love it. It's reverting back to the original ideas, the original tropes that comes with vampirism that was popularized by Dracula, by Bram Stoker. The gothicness, the fear, the mood. In some strange way, I do think people crave that aspect of vampirism, not because they're afraid of anything, but that was how it was traditionally presented. This is just an impromptu video with my ideas on the vampire trope and why it's in decline. And just seeing how that has declined, I have more to say. This is just part one, and I'll be back.